take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll show up.
In your mind. Cloven hooves, eyes burning red, a face stamped into your memory by childhood comics, games, and films. You thought that was the beginning and the end of the story. But was that ever really Satan? The oldest Satan in scripture looked nothing like this. In Hebrew, Satan meaning adversary, accuser. Not a proper name, but a title for a role. In the book of Job, Satan is no world-defying God, but a prosecutor in the heavenly court. He attends the divine council at God's summons. As you know, Old Testament written in Hebrew. And that adversary, accuser, joined in God's summons to the divine council, and God says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan got allowance, killing his family and everything. But not Job, because God didn't allow. Here Satan breath, no fire, wields no horns. He carries out an assignment. And without God's explicit permission, he cannot touch a single hair on Job's head. But over time, that original figure was entirely rewritten. It wasn't a single reinterpretation, it was a centuries-long chain reaction. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and later literature and media, each reshaped Satan to fit their own needs. The first wave of distortion began beyond the law and the prophets. In Apocrypha and Talmudic commentary, here Satan shifted from heaven's persecutor to enemy of all mankind. From there, Dante, Milton, and the age of print and poster locked that image into the one we all know. A theoretical lord of evil, complete with fire and crown. And as you know, once an image hardens, it holds more power than the original truth. That's why today, when we speak of Satan, almost no one remembers the figure that first walked onto the page. Dante Alighieri, say his name, and the Divine Comedy rises to mind, especially Inferno, the descent into hell. 9 circles, endless punishments, boiling blood, burning sand, and lake of ice. Half of the hell we picture today was painted by the tip of his pen. And yet here's the irony. Dante himself called this vast epic a comedy. Not comedy in the modern sense of jokes, but in the medieval sense. A narrative that moves from tragedy towards a hopeful ending. From darkness into light. Even so, he wrote hell with surgical precision, as if he were a reporter watching the Last Judgment unfold. The problem? His work was not theology, it was literature. Dante placed political enemies and personal rivals into specific circles of damnation without hesitation. Even some priests at the time scoffed, "This isn't divine revelation, it's Dante's personal blacklist." Lasciate ogni speranza, voi che entrate. Abandon all hope, you who enter here. One line, lifted from a poet's imagination, crossed over from literature into religion. For centuries afterward, it was carved above hell's gates, in paintings, sermons, films, even video games, as though it were a decree from heaven itself. Once literally, imagination is consumed as theological truth, people no longer see the Bible's hell, they see Dante's hell first. And as media revolves, so did the spectacles. hell became harder, crueler, more dramatic because drama sells. Dante was a poet, not a prophet. But his hell, sharpened by centuries of repetition, has been cemented in sermons, in popular memory, and in Hollywood's lens as though it were history itself. The 17th century England, between the Puritan Revolution and the restoration of the monarchy, a blind poet named John Milton turned away from the world's light to follow an inner vision. From the darkness came one of the greatest, grandest epics in the English language, Paradise Lost. In scripture, Satan's fall takes only a few lines. Milton, however, raised him to the center of the stage. Here, Satan is no more villain. He fights for freedom, resists oppression, and dares to seize a throne of his own making. Readers find themselves drawn, almost against their will, to his speeches, to his resolve, to the fire in his defiance. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. One line, for centuries, it has been repeated as a rallying cry for revelation, as a rallying cry for rebellion. The irony, Milton never meant to make Satan cool. His true aim was to show how pride corrupts glory, how rebellion turns inward and destroys itself. But readers often stop listening before the fall. They remember the charisma, not the collapse. Literature has a way of betraying its author's intent. Milton's Satan became a prototype for the Romantic poets. Shelley, Byron, who recast him as the heroic rebel. The image spread further still into rock lyrics, into films, into psychology's archetypes. Here the arc becomes clear. Job's prosecutor, Dante's judge, Milton's rebel. 3 retellings, and with each Satan shifted from, shaped by theology, politics, and the culture that needed him. Milton sought to write the tragedy of pride. His readers found instead a vision of unbroken will against the throne. This was the turning point, where popular culture stopped fearing Satan and began wearing his defiance like a badge. What we call Satanism today has almost nothing to do with the Satan of Scripture. It is closer to a 20th century alloy forged from media spectacle, the fear industry, and the public appetite for the macabre. Historically, groups labeled Satan worshippers fall into 2 broad categories. The deliberate anti-Christian movement, the clearest example is the Church of Satan, founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey. Here Satan wasn't a literal being, he was a symbol of freedom, desire, and self-interest. They rejected animal or human sacrifice outright. Instead, they staged parodies of Catholic Mass, donned choir-like robes, and splashed inverted crosses and goat head emblems across their rituals. And you know where that inverted crosses came from? What was his name? Peter. They rejected animal, or the goal wasn't to summon demons, but to mock religious authority and present a theoretical, philosophical countercreed. Media coverage flattened, denounced, LaVey's black-robed pageantry was sold to the public as if it were genuine occult sorcery, and the public believed it. The criminal appropriation. Then there were those who hijacked the imagery of darker purposes in the 1970s and 80s. A handful of murderer and sexual assaults in the US and UK left behind pentagrams or ritual-like staging at the scene. These incidents triggered the wildfire of the satanic panic. Newspaper and television linked everywhere serial killing, child abductions, even rock music, to supposed Satan worship. In the American evangelical heartland, pastors preached about Satanists in our town, while certain corners of psychology pushed the unproven recovered memory technique, producing hundreds of false testimonies of ritual abuse. The media monster, most of those stories collapsed under scrutiny. In courtrooms, in medical reviews, in policy records, the rituals turned out to be performance, misinterpretations, or the byproduct of mental illness and mass hysteria. But by then, the imagery was locked in place. Satanists in black robes, red candles, animal blood, a screaming victim on a stage, or a screaming victim on a stone altar. It was cinema, marketed as truth. The ego game, that is. Many self-styled satanic groups didn't believe in the literal devil at all. They thrived on sorcery, invented hierarchies, and addressed each other as brother and sister. They recycled the very imagery the media had fed them, turning it into a custom for self-importance. Ironically, in trying to mock religion, they mirrored it. Ritual, dogma, insider status. They chained themselves to the same structure they claimed to have broken. They could do better. The bottom line, 90%, I call 90% of what had been called Satanism has no theological link to the biblical Satan. The rest is largely smoke, exaggeration, or criminal camouflage. And yet the caricature persists in games, films, news cycles, and even fashion. What most people think as Satan worship isn't an ancient creed. It's a media product sold on fear and bought with curiosity. It is. Once Satan was religion's sworn enemy, by the mid-20th century, he had been repackaged as something else entirely, a brand. The first to sense this market value were in the music industry. In the 1960s and 70s, rock and heavy metal bands draped themselves in satanic imagery as a badge of danger. Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Metallica, goat skull inverted crosses figure in flames. Their album covers promised the forbid, We talked about that earlier. This wasn't theology, it was marketing. We are not your parents' music. For American teenagers, playing what their parents hated became a right of identity, isn't it? And the face of that rebellion was Satan. Hollywood locked the visual code in place early. The Exorcist, 1973, I still cannot find a pretty good horror movie like that. The Omen, 1976. Constantine, 2005. He was damn cool, yes, cannot deny it. These films favored cinematic terror over doctorial accuracy. Satan appeared as a red or black figure, horned and monstrous, or a seductively flawless human. Repetition hardened those choices into a template. Soon advertising, fashion, even comic books borrowed the same visuals. Theological substance faded. What remained was a ready-made character that could sell. From luxury houses to streetwear brands, designer-minded satanic symbols, and rewrapped them as cool and edgy. Inverted cross pendants, behemoth, Baphomet print shirts, horn-shaped earrings. None of it tied to actual satanic ritual. But for the buyer, it carried the illusion of breaking taboo. I think I do have it too. Pop culture uses the image media covers the usage. Creators take their cues from that coverage. In this cycle, Satan becomes even more polished, even more marketable, where his theological weight is pushed further into the shadow. Conclusion is Satan is no longer simply the embodiment of evil. He sells movie tickets, albums, t-shirts, ad campaigns, and viral memes. More than half of the Satan we meet today isn't born of fear at all, but of marketing strategy. Apocrypha and the Church Fathers, Talmudic, Satan became identified with the archangel Lucifer, who rebelled against God. This was more than theology, was a political tool. If Satan was the absolute evil, the church could stand as the absolute good, its authority shielded from challenge. Through the Middle Ages, Catholicism codified Satan with precision. Catechism, confessionals, trials, and grand exorcism were not just spiritual battles, they were ceremonies that imprinted the church's supremacy into the public mind. The message was clear: only the church could defeat the evil. In that architecture, Satan was a necessary enemy. In Islam, Satan appears as Iblis, cast out for refusing to bow to Adam. He cannot compel humans by force. His only weapon is the whisper, waswasha, that tempts hearts away from God. This framing throws the responsibility back on the human. It is not Satan made me do it, but did you accept the whisper? Zoroastrianism, cosmic order peace, Aramazda, against Angra Mainyu. Here the Satan figure is not a subordinate creature, but a primordial force equal in power to the god. This dualism would later echo in Jewish and Christian visions. You know what dualism is in the mind? So, black and white, of an apocalyptic war between absolute forces. The conclusion is Satan's face changes from faith to faith. But behind every mask lies the same narrative function: to test belief, to bind communities together, and to cement authority. In every case, his role has been part of the survival strategy of the, religious institution itself. So after the Industrial Revolution, newspapers and pamphlets flooded the public. Yellow journalism, eager to sell crime, sex, and religious fear, sensationalized witch trials and tales of devil worship. Photography and engraving gave Satan a concrete, visible form, turning the once abstract figure of religious tradition into a character with skin facial expressions, and presence. Silent films, and theater repackaged religious messages as horror entertainment, Gothic literature, Milton's Paradise Lost, and Dante's Divine Comedy were visualized with dramatic sets and elaborate costumes. Audience saw for the first time hell and Satan in motion. From here, Satan was cemented as a consumer product of fear. There was also a book from Goethe, right? I don't remember the name currently, but anyways, you know what. If you know. In America, during the Cold War, Christian moral order was branded as the identity of the West. To contrast it with the atheism of the Soviet Union, Satan became a metaphor for communism itself. Churches and the press jointly reinforced the image. Satan equal the enemy of the system. TV talk shows, crimes reattachment programs, and even educational documentaries spread stories of underground Satanists sacrificing children. Most cases were later proven false, but the field was exploded for political and religious gain. Politicians railed supporters with the "We must protect children from Satan," while churches increased donations. Religion gained moral authority, media gained ratings and sales, and politics gained mass mobilization. And you gain what? In this four-way pact, Satan became a brand where fiction and reality blurred. A brand that still permeates today's films, games, fashion, and music. The symbol of Satan is not merely evil, it also operates as a fundamental rejection of authority. Therefore, the biblical story of a being cast down from heaven is translated in human unconscious as an archetype of defiance against power and order. Psychologically, during the late teen to early 20s stage of identity formation, the forbidden, the shunned, the absolutely not allowed often become even more alluring. I cannot deny that I was in that time too. Anyway, Satan's image becomes the perfect icon of defying authority at this stage. What matters here is not actual faith, but role-play identification. This is why rock, punk, and metal so often use satanic symbols. The sociologist Stanley Cohen, his concept of moral panic shows the more authority brands something as absolute evil, the more it becomes a tool of inverted identity for some. Oh, that's bad? Then I will choose it on purpose. This paradox turns into the satanic icon into a flag of resistance. Rebellion rarely ends as a solo act. Groups that brand themselves with Satan often proclaims freedom and individuality, yet in practice they create new forms of authority and rules. Psychology calls this alternative authority, the energy that once negates the old order transfer into a new system of control. The result, the groups gathered in the name of freedom often reproduce the same hierarchy and oppression as churches or religious sects. Anyways, many Satanists are not rejecting God as such, but rejecting the concept of God within the existing system. Yet the symbols and rituals they create to fill the void soon become another form of religion. At this point, rebellion ceases to be revolution, it becomes a recurring masquerade. The draw to the satanic icon is instinctive, but its long-term power comes from the persistence of repression, and taboo. When repression vanishes, rebellion loses its direction. Those media and religion must keep selling Satan for the symbol to retain its vitality. Most of that image is borrowed not from direct experience but from the imagination and narrative of others. The moment a crafted story, doctrine, fear, and symbol is made to appear as if it were a naturally existing reality, we begin to set our root into that illusion. Religion, in defining absolute good, first needed to place an absolute evil on the opposite side. To shape this figure of evil, Satan was given a name, personality, purpose, dwelling place, even a detailed appearance. Over time, this image became imprinted more powerfully through sermons, catechism, paintings, theater, and film than through the scripture themselves, as we all spoken about it earlier, right? But anyways, it was only a matter of caution. But repeated images, symbols, and rituals planted, and the unconscious conviction that this is real, like an old building anchored deep into the ground, the concept becomes embodied into our language, customs, and culture as a faith accomplice. We mistake it for a natural part of the landscape, thus we rarely gain the chance to critique it, let alone analyze it. Only by peeling back its surface do we see the hollow inside. Only by digging deep do we discover how thin and fragile the knowledge built on it really is. And only then do we begin to ask, when, by whom, and for what purpose was this illusion made? By the time that question is spoken, it is already half broken. And I am here to break it with you, because you deserve better.